slept. Sleep required darkness, and darkness had been illegal for 300 years. Huge crystal lanterns the size of houses hung from iron chains above every street. They burned cold white all day, all night, turning shadows into knives. People said the light kept the old things away. People were wrong. Magic was dying here. Every spell cost a memory. One incantation, and you forgot your sister's laugh. Another, and you forgot why you ever loved anyone. Most citizens had already sold their pasts for a little warmth or a little power. Some had even forgotten their own names. Kale still remembered his. That was the problem. 19 years old, black cloak soaked through with rain, twin short blades hidden under oilskin. The guild tattoo on his left wrist, an eye inside a broken crown, was burning tonight. That only happened when Varn was close. He had one rule left: no more killing. Varn was about to make that rule impossible. 7 days. 7 hearts cut out and fed to the obsidian spire in the city's heart. One more heart, and the spire would wake up hungry enough to swallow Vernhold whole. Kale knew the ritual better than anyone. He had once been the hand holding the knife. Now the knife walked on its own 2 legs and tried to pretend it still had a soul. Rain hammered the cobblestones like judgment. A crystal lantern overhead flickered, coughed, and died. In the sudden pocket of darkness, a voice drifted out, soft, ancient, amused. "You're late, little assassin." Lyrian stepped from a shadow that hadn't existed a second ago. Moon-pale skin, black hair plastered to her face, eyes the color of bruises after the fist is gone. She looked 17. She had looked 17 since the first lantern was lit. "I'm not here for you," Kale said. "Liar." She tilted her head, and raindrops fell upward around her for a heartbeat. "You're here for him, and he's waiting at the top of the old bell tower, same as always." Kale's fingers tightened on the hilts under his cloak. "Walk away, princess. This doesn't end well for anyone." "It never does," she smiled. "But I like watching you pretend you still have choices." He left her standing beneath the dead lantern and started climbing the broken spiral stairs. Each step echoed like a heartbeat he no longer trusted. The bell tower had no bell anymore, only wind and rain and the smell of old blood. Varn stood in the center of a circle drawn in salt and sorrow, tall, skeletal white hair like frost on bone. Runes crawled over his bare arms, eating memories with every pulse of light. In front of him floated a cage of black glass. Inside it, the 8th heart still beat, slow, wet, defiant. The old wizard didn't look up. "I taught you better than to hesitate, boy. I'm not your boy anymore." "No," Varn said, and for a moment his voice cracked like thin ice. "You're the knife I should have thrown away years ago." Kyle drew steel. The rain found the open arches and turned the world into silver needles. They met in the middle of the circle. Steel screamed against shadow. Varn's staff was living darkness that remembered every spell it had ever devoured. Kale fought with 2 short swords and the terrible certainty that if he lost, thousands would die. If he won, he would forget why that had ever mattered. A cut opened along Kale's ribs. Blood hissed where it touched the runes. Varn spoke a single word that tasted like grief. Memory tore loose. Kale staggered. He saw a small house on fire, a woman reaching for him, his own child hands clutching a dagger too heavy to lift. He heard her scream his name once. Then the image shattered like dropped glass. Gone forever. He roared and attacked harder. The fight spilled out onto the narrow balcony that ringed the tower. Lightning clawed the sky, showing Vernhold spread below, like a city made of broken teeth and dying light. Varn's staff shattered Kale's left blade. The right blade found the old man was when the betrayal came. Cold arms slid around him from behind. Lyrian's voice, soft as a lullaby, against his ear. I really did try to save you, Kale. A thin silver dagger slid between his ribs, not deep enough to kill, just enough to freeze every muscle. Shadow poured from her hands into the wound, thick and sweet as opium. Varn laughed until tears mixed with the rain. Lyrian caught Kyle as his legs buckled. She lowered him gently to the wet stone, stroked rain from his forehead like a sister saying goodnight. You were never the 8th heart, she whispered. You were the 9th, the one that still had something precious left to lose. She leaned close, lips brushing the shell of his ear, and told him her true name. It was a sound like breaking bells and falling snow, like every lullaby ever forgotten. It burned itself into the last corner of his mind that still belonged to him. Then she stood. She took the beating heart from its cage and pressed it into Varn's trembling hands. The old wizard looked almost grateful. Lyrian turned her back as the obsidian spire cracked open beneath them and the city began to scream. Kyle lay on the balcony and watched the crystal lanterns die one by one. He felt memories sliding out of him like coins through a torn pocket. The smell of his mother's bread on winter mornings. The first time he ever laughed so hard his ribs hurt. The color of the sky before the lantern stole it forever. When the last light went out, he discovered one thing was still nailed in place. Her true name. He whispered it into the new darkness. Broken, bleeding, no longer entirely human. Far below, something ancient and starving heard him and smiled with too many teeth. The rain kept falling. Minutes passed, or hours. Time had become negotiable. Kale dragged himself to the edge of the balcony. His wound had stopped bleeding. Lyrian's shadow was thorough. He looked down at the black city and saw tiny fires blooming where people fought, or looted, or simply burned. Then, impossibly far away, on the other side of Virnhold, a single crystal lantern flickered back to life. Small, stubborn, barely enough light to see your own hand. Kale laughed. It hurt, but it was the first honest sound he'd made in years. He pulled himself over the railing, found footing on the slick tiles, and began the long climb down. He no longer remembered his mother's face. He no longer remembered why killing had once felt wrong, but he remembered a name that tasted like breaking bells and falling snow, and he remembered that somewhere in the dark, one light had decided not to die. 15 minutes later, a lone figure in a torn black cloak limped through the dead streets toward that single impossible lantern. Behind him, the obsidian spire drank its fill and went quiet. Ahead of him, the rain kept falling, and somewhere between the two, a boy who was no longer quite a boy kept walking, because even monsters need something to walk toward.